Let me welcome our speaker today, Dr. Kiruba Krishnaswamy. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Biomedical, Biological, and Chemical Engineering and Division of Food Systems and Bioengineering Food Science Program at the University of Missouri. You can visit her website at www.feastlab.org.
Thank you, Satvik and Akhil. It's really encouraging to see students step up during this COVID crisis and trying to help communities. So that's really inspiring. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to interview with us. And so, just to get into our first question, how would you describe your work slash research as it relates to food insecurity to the general audience?
Okay, so my research focuses on two interconnected challenges of food and nutrition security. To explain that, are you able to see this world map, like the globe?
Yes, we're able to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the World War, around the 1950s, we were around 2.5 billion people on this planet Earth. And now it's 2020, and as of today, we are around 7.8 billion people. And it's been expected that we'll be growing to 9 to 10 billion people in the year 2050. And during such unprecedented times of COVID, how are we going to feed people with nutritious food? That is a big question that we face. And when we ask about feeding people, the next thing that comes to mind is hunger. Around, there are two types of hunger. One is chronic hunger. And at present, before the COVID started, it was around 821 million people who were affected by chronic hunger. That is, 1 in 9 person is affected by chronic hunger. It could be a child who's going to school, a pregnant woman, elderly person, or anyone. And this is when someone doesn't have enough food to eat for a prolonged period of time. And that's a big problem, right? But there is another form of hunger called the hidden hunger. And as the name suggests, that not many people talk about this. And it hidden hunger affects more than 2 billion people on this planet. That's roughly 1/3 of the world population. And every country on this planet is affected by hidden hunger problems, especially children. Like around 7 million children die annually before they reach their 5th birthday due to malnutrition problems, which is a big concern. And these numbers might rise after the COVID. That's what is being discussed during in the forums. To explain what is hidden hunger, I've just simplified this. So there are a lot of pathways that are involved, right? So to put that, hidden hunger is due to micronutrient deficiencies, and like it leads to wasting and stunting, like underweight on one side of the spectrum. On the other hand, it also leads to overweight and obesity. So this is what we call as the double burden of malnutrition. And currently, you can see most countries are affected by this problem. And that's what my research tries to address. How we try to address is, let me share. So one side we have problems of hidden hunger and chronic hunger. On the other hand, we have uh, food waste. Around 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted annually. Like you have people without food, on the other hand, you have food that's getting wasted. And this term called food waste, like the word waste is a terminology that's created by humans. In nature, there was nothing called waste. It had its own purpose. Everything, it was more sustainable. Everything was decomposed into something, and there was a ecological cycle that was evolved around food. But we, what to say? It needs to be like, we need to learn a lot from nature, how she's able to process this in such a way that every single thing is made into a useful product. So if we know the technologies, if we know the method of doing it, then instead of calling it as waste, it will be rather called as a raw material. So we'll have around 1.3 billion tons of raw materials to convert into food that could be feeding the people who are going hungry. So that's the whole idea of my research group. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. After reading your contents on the Feast Lab website, we realized that you have combined several disciplines of science to combat the issue of food insecurity. So, what technologies have you been working on in your lab to address this issue?
Thanks for that question. Yes, we are an interdisciplinary group of researchers who work at an intersection of science, engineering, and technology. The problem that we're trying to address is a complex problem. Like food security, food and nutrition security is a global challenge. And we need people from different perspectives to understand, to address this problem. And in my lab, we use three different ways of addressing it. One is sustainable food engineering, where um, how, have you heard about this concept called upcycling? You take something that goes as waste and you convert it into a high value product. So we try to do value addition to food loss and food waste, especially with fruits and vegetables, which is the most perishable commodities, and medicinal plants and underutilized crops, and try to add value to those materials and recover micronutrients from them. So that can lead to the next step, that is the food fortification. We fortify food with micronutrients and develop ready to eat therapeutic foods, like especially for women and children. And then when we are mixing micronutrients, like like vitamins and minerals, not all compounds are compatible with each other. So you need to encapsulate them. You need to find a better way of delivering it to people, so when they consume that food, they're getting the right nutrients. So that's where encapsulation, oral delivery platforms come into play. And all these things, we use sustainable food processing equipments and tools to address all these areas of research. And they are all connected with something called zero hunger. How many of you have heard about sustainable development goals? Have you heard about SDGs?
No,
What's it again? Sorry.
It's called, okay, let me share that with you. So have you seen this before?
I haven't. No.
I haven't.
You haven't. So the thing, if you see here, there's zero hunger that aligns with the zero hunger here. And these are the global goals. In the year 2015, around 193 countries joined together and we signed an agenda, a transformative agenda for the year 2030. If we have to have a sustainable world, then we need to address all these 17 goals. And most of these goals are interconnected. You need to have poverty, hunger, good health, education, all everything is some way connected to each other. And that's why we need to have people from different disciplines to bring different perspective to solve the same problem. And that's why my group is a transdisciplinary group.
Thank you for that detailed explanation as to what your lab does. So changing tracks a little bit. So there are many ways that the general public can contribute to help abolish food insecurity. And specifically, the food bank makes a great effort to eliminate hunger among families across the nation. So how do you think your technologies can assist with the food bank's mission?
Okay. The food bank, when have you visited a food bank before? So when you go to
Yes.
food bank, there are so many things like the food, every single dollar that's donated is converted into $21 worth of food that reaches people, the vulnerable group who cannot afford that. And how the technologies that we develop in our lab is we could develop ready to eat therapeutic foods for specific, because a child, the nutritional requirement for a child is different from that of an adolescent kid. and that is different from an adult. And it's different for women and during different phases of life. Like, a pregnant woman or a lactating mother will have different nutritional requirements to compare uh, to to a female of different age groups. So we could develop ready to eat therapeutic foods for different age groups. And then during processing of food, there is a lot of waste that's generated. And so we can develop technologies that could reduce food waste and food loss in the production line in the food banks. So some of the technologies that we work in our lab could address these areas and help the food bank.
So our next question sort of ties into this one. Uh, how can we help the food bank and the food insecure families?
Okay. That's a very important question, especially during this time of COVID, because monetary donations that will help a long way, because the food bank is a non-profit and it has connections with a lot of food industries. It has the supply chain already in place. It connects with the school, public school, like the school systems, the food industries, the transportation system. So every single dollar that we donate triples, and it could reach the poorest of the poor through proper channels. And so that's why donating would be the first and the best way to support the food bank. And also during this time, the food supply chain is completely disrupted both nationally, globally, and it's making so difficult to reach. Like, it's making food being to procure food or to feed people who are in need. That's becoming very challenging. So anyway, if we could volunteer somehow, like keeping social distancing norm, or that those are some of the ways that we could help the food bank. It's like donations are the best because that will help them to get the right people to pay for them. So those are some things that I would like to say.
Thank you for that answer. And the next question is kind of about the current situation, which is, do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has escalated the issue of food and nutrition insecurity? And if so, like, how has it escalated?
Yes, but, the thing is, because your supply chain is affected, right? Hunger affects mostly people in vulnerable, like me. Yeah. So when you look at hunger, around 80% of people living in the rural communities are the most affected, and 20% in the urban population. So when your food is produced, like in the farm, and if you don't have a proper transportation system that's going to transfer that food, let's say for tomatoes, okay, it's grown in a farm, and then if the transportation is already blocked, then your tomato is going to stay in your farm. And if it's not preserved or processed immediately, like because the shelf life of the produce is very limited, and when you have intense heat, humidity, it's going to deteriorate. So then you're going to have a food loss in the farm, and then you're not going to get enough, that particular tomato that has to reach the supermarket is not going to reach on time, and it's going to increase the cost of the food. So there's so many ways of looking at it. It's a complex problem here, and I'm trying to, let me say, okay, so when there is some natural calamities like drought or like current COVID crisis, the production goes down. When the production goes down, what happens? The price of that commodity becomes very high. Only it, like instead of paying $10, like $5 for a bag of tomatoes, you're going to pay $15. Or if there is no stock, then there is no stock. So your your the cost is going to increase. And when the cost increases, Only people who can afford to buy that particular commodity can buy. And those who are vulnerable, who cannot afford to pay to buy that commodity, they're not going to buy. And mostly it's the poorest of the poor. That's the section that's not going to have enough food. And then how, if they're not going to have enough food, imagine a family of 5 having children and they're not going to get the right micronutrient, like the nutrients that they need to survive, then that leads to chronic hunger over a period of time, right? So when someone is experiencing chronic hunger over a period of time, then it affects their neural development. It affects so much. Um, it it's like a cyclic cycle. So we anticipate that hope the COVID ends soon. If not, we are in for seeing some drastic changes to the food system, and it's going to affect a lot of people. Before COVID, we had 821 million people chronic hunger, affected by chronic hunger. After COVID, we do not know what's the situation and how long this is going to prevail. If people are not going to go to work, if things are going to stay like shelter in place for a prolonged period of time, then we do not know what's. I'm not able to answer that question because it's a very difficult question at this time point, but hope we will get through this situation soon and everything will get back to normal. But even after COVID, we need to seriously think how the food system is going to be um, restored back. That is a big question that needs to be answered.
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you for
And so kind of just like building off of your answer. So in addition to like the low supply that is occurring currently, do you think it's another reason like that um maybe this COVID-19 has escalated the issue is because there's like a higher demand for food, so like such as like several people are starting to stock up on food and things like that?
Yes. People are trying. That's what happens, right? When there's a shortage of food, people try to stock up on food, and those who can do that uh, are economically well off. They can afford to store food at home because most of the perishables, if you don't have a refrigerator, it's going to go bad. So then the other side of the spectrum, already they cannot afford to buy, and then there is no food to buy. So it's going to be an imbalance, economic imbalance. And so what we can do as citizens, as people who are considerate about our neighbors, try to just buy what you need to sustain, and do not hoard too much, take too much of supplies, and try to share. At such times, we need everyone to have at least enough food to eat. Just think of people children who might go hungry without food, uh, pregnant women who do not have enough food, or they have to go to work because they are thinking about either how they're going to pay their rents, how so many questions. And there's so many people without jobs at present because of they were highly paid workers. So we need to be considerate about such situations and have some empathy towards everyone.
Thank you. So we'll have to conclude here because we're running short in time. Uh, we learned a lot from this, and I'm sure our viewers will also learn a lot from watching this video. Um, we learned a lot about how your lab is contributing to um, aiding the food bank and trying to solve food insecurity. Aki, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this interview. Um, I think it provided lots of good information about the issue at hand and several technologies and organizations that exist to combat this issue of food insecurity. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just keep hope. Like, the best antivirus is having courage, strength, hope, and positivity during such crisis. And